Historia Canadiana is recorded on the unceded lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka First Nation. Hello, everyone, and welcome to A Cultural History of Canada. My name
Hi.
is my name is Hi.
It's
That's it.
rude not to respond. When people say hello, it's rude not to respond.
Hello.
My mother didn't raise no asshole. Like,
Yeah, Elise did her job correctly. She did not raise a rude boy.
yeah.
To
I'm sorry.
quote
Did I interrupt you? I feel like that's very rude.
to quote Rihanna on this Canadian History
Be a
podcast.
rude boy, boy, don't give it up.
Off to a great start. I shouldn't laugh too much. I have sprained ribs, so I don't really
Jesus
want to.
Christ.
Yeah,
Did you
a
get them
lot.
fighting for freedom? The fight against tariffs?
Oh, always. Oh God, have you been following the elections? Actually, this is relevant to the show, I guess, just because it's broadly
Honestly, I
Canadian.
was thinking about this, and yeah, I think we should have every episode. We should have just a little touch in about what's going
Hmm.
on with this, like tariffs and elections and everything, just
Hmm.
because it's important.
Sure. Yeah. Now, have you been following it from
Yeah. Oh my
literally
God.
anywhere
Yeah.
but Canada?
I mean, I'm not super close following, but I get like I keep on top of the polls, the gaps, the gives, like what everybody's doing well, what's not doing well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And, knock on wood, but it looks like it's going to be a Carney win,
Yeah. I guess
which
knock
is
on wood.
like, I mean, knock on wood that, it
It's not
isn't a
wood, yes.
Polyev win. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yay, Canadian politics.
Yeah. We've really just given up there ever being multiple parties ever again.
Yeah. As
But
my
honestly, it's a poll thing. Like looking at what a lot of people are saying in polls, the bloc can't go on because they're still the one issue party. And even Quebecers are getting tired of that one issue.
Mhm.
And then NDP needs to drop Singh. They're not going
Needs
to
to
go anywhere.
fucking revitalize their entire position in order
That's
to
true.
become more left.
Yeah,
Right? Like again, you can disagree or not with it, but they need to distinguish themselves in some way, and they're not
they
doing
do.
it right now. So,
Well, and I think that's Singh, and that's just poor leadership.
yep, yep,
Whereas they need to bring back, they need a Jack Layton type figure, personality or whatever to,
yeah, yeah. If not more.
yeah.
But I get what you mean. Yeah, absolutely. I didn't look at the most recent polls, but the last time I checked, like the Liberals were ahead by like 15 points or something like that. Yeah, like a dozen.
They all, yeah. Polls don't mean anything. If you're
No, of
Canadian,
course.
go
Of course.
out, vote, the usual, get out there and vote. But things are looking well. It also would be the funniest flip
Mm,
in history, like the fact that they lost that much of a majority that badly.
yeah. Yeah.
Like no matter what happens, no matter even if Polyev ends up winning, he's going to be the most ineffectual prime minister ever because everybody's going to know he doesn't have it.
No, that and also like he people have seen what his kind of rhetoric does, right? When it's
Yeah,
actually applied to the government, which is chaos.
yeah,
Like
exactly.
nobody wants that
Well,
because
that's it.
it's
They drop axe the tax now for lost the liberal decade.
yeah. Yeah, I noticed that.
Or
But part of
they're
it
still trying to keep it an axe the tax election.
but part of it is because the liberals just basically stole most of their talking point.
Yeah,
Which doesn't give me a lot of hope for the liberals, to be honest.
no.
But at least they have a sweet uncle at their head, which I guess is an improvement.
Well, at least they have somebody who's actually qualified.
Yeah, that too.
Like that's like anything else, you can just Mark Carney is probably the most qualified person for the job.
Hmm. I mean, I guess Poilievre is qualified insofar as he is literally a career politician, but he doesn't necessarily have,
Any experience doing anything ever.
like for how people actually live,
Yeah,
right?
he's never
Which
worked
to
a
be
job in
fair,
his life.
Carney was a banker, which traditionally speaking are not like the most in touch people on earth.
No, but at least it's an actual job versus
Sure,
Polyev's never actually worked a real job in his life.
I guess. Yeah, that's fair.
The most interesting poll I've seen is as far as the woman vote goes,
Hmm.
it's gone like 87% to Carney.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Like the conservative platform is chock full of like anti-queer and anti-women
Or
messaging,
just
right?
any pro-Trump people.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I think that's really the what this election has shown more than anything else. Like bringing it back to our more cultural perspective of it and our
Yeah,
history
yeah,
perspective of it is the differentiation between Canada and America.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's been this growing sentiment for a while now that Canada is just America light, Diet
Yeah.
America, whatever. And I think this sort of
I've made that argument. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But I
Yeah.
think what this sort of election is showing is it's really showing like there is a real distinguishment here. The
Yeah.
things that work down there do not work up here.
And they barely work down there either.
No, but like for example, like the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
politics.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Like the Republican playbook does not work for the conservatives.
No, no. I
And
think
it's
like at least I'll give us credit for that. We seem to have a slightly better memory where that's concerned because we kind of tried those
I
politics with the Harper
honestly,
years.
it's our better education.
That would probably yeah,
Yeah,
that might
we
be
are
it.
a better educated country. Like that's a fact.
Mm,
Statistically across the board, we are more educated, and that means that we do not have that same fallibility for a lot of this stuff.
hmm Yeah. No, I would buy that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, as an educator myself, like
Yeah, exactly.
that's my perspective, that's my 2 cents.
Are you
But this
saying that educators are like
important. Would
important?
you call them essential?
Hmm.
Mm.
Do I want to have most of my livelihood cut by crazy people who have an advantage in cutting education?
But it's also just, I think, like it's also we don't have as much as a disregard slash disrespect for our news organizations and agencies.
Although, funny enough, did you see that one about
I'm
Polyev about like his management of media during his
exactly.
yeah,
He
yeah,
kicked the
yeah.
press corps out of it. And again,
Yeah.
that backfired on him.
hmm
Trump does the same things and gets good, like he gets positives. Polyev is
Yeah.
trying to do the same things and negatives happen, consequences. And I think that's sort of or even again, you must have sent it to me or I sent it to you, the strawberries.
I don't remember that. What do you mean the
Oh,
strawberries?
so there was a aisle in a grocery store, and there
Mm-hmm.
was two like on one side it was like Canadian strawberries, $6.
Yeah.
On the other, it was American strawberries, $4.
Oh yeah.
Even though they were cheaper, the American ones, nobody had touched them.
Yeah, yeah.
The Canadian ones were all gone.
hmm
And I think, again, it's a small, small difference. It's a very specific example. Like, obviously, not the same data. We don't have a lot, but I think it is a definitive example of we are not as consumer consumed, really. Like, we're not that, like, we are willing to go for the other option, even if it's a bit more expensive.
hmm
Whereas somebody who's lived in the States and has, like, been spent a lot, they'll do the cheapest every time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I
I
think
think,
part of that also like the advantage that we have here is generally this is slowly again something that's being eroded, right? Is
mhm,
we have conventionally had more secure jobs here in Canada, right? I don't know, like just from the agricultural perspective, a lot of
mhm.
jobs have been somewhat well managed and governmentally controlled, which allows for protections for these people.
For
Union
sure.
jobs have been slightly better protected here, which allows for better pay to allow us to actually get pay for the $6 strawberries for a little bit longer, depending on how
Yeah.
long the tariffs go. I don't know how long that's going to last of like people being able to go that extra mile. I don't know,
But
but
I just think it's like, and I think a lot of people were right for a while. Canada was just becoming America light,
Mhm.
but this moment has really sort of thrown that idea out into contrast out the window. Like we are very much like positioning ourselves in a very particular way now.
Yeah.
Every
The
speech
thing
that
I'm thinking is going to happen is once like this whole tariff situation blows over, because it inevitably will. Like eventually
Mhm.
things are going to return to some sense of relative normalcy.
um,
Um,
it's just going to be an
maybe.
evolution of normal. It's going to be
Yeah,
new
exactly.
normal.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I hope that something changes regardless, right? The issue is if that's going to actually stick around, right? Like
Honestly,
I
I
don't
think
know
what's
if
going
it's
to happen is like unless there's two things that happen with these tariffs. Trump like either caves and renegotiates a new deal, which is
mhm.
not going to happen,
Yeah.
or we find new trading partners, Japan, Europe, like these people that we're already in talks with.
Mhm.
We
Yeah.
already are renegotiating these deals, and once that's done, we're never going to look back.
Yeah. Or look
Like
inward. Like we have a
Oh
lot of
yeah.
our
Or
own.
we're gonna exactly we're gonna like, and that's what I think is of if the timeline for things to return to normal is getting smaller and smaller. We're getting more and more to a point where we're just gonna end up trading inward, so we're gonna do more domestic, or we're just gonna start looking outward more. And that's
Good.
the real like that's the kicker what needs to happen. That's my personal opinion. But again, like I was listening to some because I'm with my mother now. Hi,
Mhm.
Elise. And she loves listening to her podcasts and her all her
Yeah, yeah,
stuff
yeah.
listening to politics. And so what
Hmm.
they're saying is that like because the discussion has now started again on pipeline.
Yeah. Hmm.
And while there seems to be a lot, the reality is it's probably not going to happen. There's just too many factors to like again like because the idea the pipeline is for east to west, right? So
Hmm.
people in the Plains provinces want it, and people out in the Maritimes want it. People in Ontario and Quebec don't want it, and since they don't want it, you can't really build it.
Right. Although, yeah, we've said that in the past, and yet I've still built them. But like,
But that was
I'm,
again, that was in the past, and sentiment has changed.
yeah, like it was what, 10 years ago or
And that one
something
was
like that.
canceled. That
Oh, that's
pipeline one.
true. Yeah, yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. But yeah, speaking of podcasts, if people are looking for like recommendations, I'm liking a lot. The Breach has been doing a lot of
Mm,
really good coverage of both the elections um, and the tariff, like current
hmm
economic situation. They're a more independent, small um, media co-op. So
Yep.
I kind of like them. Um, so that's
Craig over on Canadian X or whatever it is, he's starting a new podcast where he's speaking
yeah,
with like influential Canadians. Ryan Reynolds is his first episode, I think.
that's really fun.
Yeah. Well, I hope Ryan stands up for his fucking country. That's the
Yeah.
part that I'm actually getting a little like peeved about all this Canada
Mhm.
stuff is no, like only one Canadian celebrity that I know of has actually stood up and said, "Hey, get out of here with your sovereignty bullshit." And that's Mike Myers.
Yeah, he did that whole thing on was he on SNL?
SNL,
Yeah, yeah,
Carney,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but is also yeah. That's my other. I think I don't know if the liberals are officially using it, but what I've been seeing going around in sort of the meme sphere, the line right now is you send in a carny to take care of the clowns, and that's pretty good.
Very awesome.
That's a pretty good like that's some axe the tax level good.
That's so funny. That's kind of
But
cool
again,
that
even
like
hearing that, like he got rid of the personal axe tax, but it looks like he's trying to like bump up the industry one.
yeah, it's kind of nebulous
Yeah,
still like what they're gonna do with it.
yeah,
I feel just again looking at history, what a lot of cases like this have, in a lot of situations like this, what they say is like, oh, we'll just do, like you say, the personal carbon
yeah.
tax thingy, and
Well, no, because
then kind
that's the
of,
one he cut.
mhm.
And I think the discussion has been raise the industry
Yeah,
because
I'm
that's been
one,
found to have an actual more effect on like emissions.
yeah, exactly. But I don't know. Sometimes
So,
also once the media cycle has stopped
yeah,
paying attention to one thing, they kind of let it
yeah,
slide into another direction. So,
yeah. Honestly, Alberta just needs to get their shit together. That's the only place that's like ruining this whole United Canada thing is fucking Alberta.
Saskatchewan is not doing great, but yeah, Alberta
No,
generally.
that's true. You know how this again, axe the tax, verb the noun. And
Verb,
for Alberta and Saskatchewan, you want to know what that verb the noun is?
go for it.
Suck the teat.
Exactly. Oh God.
All
Yeah.
right, we should probably talk about this poet since we haven't been. Again, somebody who, used their voice for power and for good, starting a
I
journal.
Yeah, that's the thing. So today we're talking about like a poet called Hector de Saint-Denys-Garneau, who in
Garneau.
Garneau, which if you've spent like
Garneau.
five minutes in Quebec, you'll know it's like a super common name.
Yeah.
Every other person and their uncle is named Garneau.
It's either Garneau, Gagnon, or Bouchard.
Tremblay.
Tremblay is another big one. Yeah,
Yeah, there
that's
you
true.
go. You got your top four right there. Um, but the point is, right?
Says
He
someone who is a Bouchard, technically, on my mother's.
That's right. That's right. So he's very well known, like poetically, but as far as like the actual timeline was concerned as to the publishing of his poetry and his actual life, very short-lived.
Hmm.
right? Dude kind of exploded like a star, right? And then just kind of fizzled out almost immediately, as far as
Right.
like his actual output is concerned, right? Um, and he's kind of considered, despite this, to be one of the more or most influential poets in Quebec, if not Canada, right? Because even English Canadian poets would go on to translate his work and recognize it as a milestone in modernism's arrival in Canada, right? Or poetic modernism, I should say.
Hmm.
Right? Because we've talked about before, like the novel, the realistic novel, and all of that, or the modernist novel did arrive a little bit earlier in Canada in the 1920s and 30s, whereas
Hmm.
poetic modernism kind of arrived more in the 30s and 40s. Um, but yeah, had you ever heard of this guy before?
Patrick, come on.
I'm taking a shot here.
Okay.
You should you should look it up actually online. Like 10 out of 10 smoke show baddie, by the way. Like,
Saint Denis and the Garneau. Tell me about him. Talk to me about him. Oh
yeah,
wow.
yeah, right. Yeah,
Oh my God.
just the
Rocking the
Wikipedia,
stash.
the Rocky the Stash, the little
A
sideways beret, very français. So yeah,
little
there's
bit of that je ne sais quoi feeling to it.
hmm. So you can kind of imagine this episode as a bit of a companion piece to the one we did on the great the Grand Noirceur, right? The Maurice Duplessis years. Um,
Ooh.
but I mean, in the sense that he very much published in and lived through that moment, and a lot of his poems are an explicit response to the feeling of that moment.
Yeah.
So even if he didn't write directly to the situations that were happening in Quebec at that moment, I think he very much channeled that energy and that sense of wanting to break out of restrictive conventions that were very much the norm in Quebec at that time. Um, so yeah, he's just kind of cool in that sense.
Hmm. Right.
But as
So
far
this
as
is a
his,
question I've actually been having for a
Mhm.
while now. So these
Yep,
guys who all like, because it just looks like there's a lot of journals.
yeah,
Are there still that many like journals around today, poetry wise?
kind of, yeah. It's not
Okay.
as it like it was a big thing. You're right. I was thinking of that the other day too. Like print culture definitely saw a moment in
Yeah.
Canada. Yeah.
And now
Um,
we've got YouTube culture, skibbity
no,
toilet.
honestly, never say that again.
What's wrong with the Riz Master, yo?
I will kick you off this
I'm sorry that I'm not
podcast.
Ohio.
Oh God. Um, but yeah, like I do think their YouTube definitely did displace some of that. You do see a lot of like
I think you still see a
small
lot of people
journals. Yeah,
publishing stuff on YouTube
yeah,
now.
yeah,
It's created a rise in spoken word poetry.
yeah. That's true. Um, Unfortunately, Book Talk has had like a negative influence, I think,
Yeah.
on
Or
how that's
Instagram
done.
poetry. Rupi
Yeah.
Kaur, Tar.
Hmm. There's another one. Like, I think she gets an undue amount of hate. I'm not a super big fan of her, but she gets an undue amount of hate. I think mostly because of everyone that took the wrong message of what her poetry was, and it just kind of ruined that whole vibe of poetry.
Who?
Right?
Rupi?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I met
Um,
her. She
oh,
came
did you?
to yeah, she spoke at one of my lectures
Oh,
when I
that's
was at
awesome.
Concordia.
Awesome.
Well, because this was back in like 2018, 2017, so she was just getting big.
Hmm.
She wasn't like, wow, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I do. You could probably we could probably do a whole episode on like the small print magazine or the small poetry
Yeah.
magazine in Canada. It was definitely a thing, and a lot of like the big names in Canadian poetry
Hmm.
definitely got their start with their own little magazines that were trying to be new and cool, and was just basically a vehicle for them to get poetry out there that was too experimental for the established literary magazines, and so they just kind of did whatever. So again, very much like you see the internet now. Yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm. Yep.
So the form's just
Whatever's
changing then. I was just
exactly.
curious, like, because we keep hearing all these people that started their magazines and their papers and their journals, and I'm like, fuck, was this an epidemic going around, you know? Like, was everybody
Yeah.
just throwing journals at each other for a while?
But I wonder if like because there's been a lot of good analyses in the past of like how like the evolution of a community and a society based on print cultures, right?
Mm.
Famously, what's this? Benedict Anderson, right, made this argument that like nationalism, for example, was explicitly tied to the rise of newspapers, right?
Sounds more like a
Um,
Benedict Arnold.
why?
Sorry, sorry. That was very Benedict Cumberbatch of me.
Yeah, but I'm sure you can make like a similar argument.
So what was
With
his name?
the guy I just mentioned, Benedict
Yeah,
Anderson.
Eggs Benedict Anderson.
I'm about to pretend that like I'm having internet problems, like
Are you
log
proud of
out.
me?
I'm so proud.
Thanks.
You're
I
part
know
of
I
the
bring a
reason.
certain je ne sais quoi to this show.
It's because we haven't been seeing each other as regularly as as we usually
No.
do, and
So there's a
so
lot
you've
of
just
stupid that's just been building up. Listen, I got chills. They're multiplying. I'm losing control. I better shape up. Woo woo woo. Because you need a man. And your heart and my heart is set on you.
so Saint-Denis-Garneau, right? Um,
Mm. Yeah,
which is
fuck. We
which
got
is
so
the
off track.
which is the usual name for how we talk about this poet, right? We don't
Hmm.
usually call him Garneau or anything like that. Usually people
The
stylize it
whole
as
thing. Saint
Saint-Denis-Garneau.
Denis Garneau.
Yeah. I might just call him Hector for the sake of this episode. Um,
Hey yo, Hector.
he was pretty much
Manga Hector.
he was pretty much emblematic of the middle class, upper middle class, kind of bougie aesthete, right? That
Mm.
was able to write poetry because he had the funds and liberty to do it, right? Which again is seen throughout the history of poetry and literature in general, right? It's either the people who had the backing of patrons or who were independently, financially stable, who could often write these types of things, right? That tends to be a thing, and it's only recently relatively changed. Um, and so he was born in Montreal, and he spent a lot of his early childhood at a family manor, right? Like Bruce fucking Wayne, right?
Except
Um,
instead of becoming Batman, he became a poet.
he became depressed.
So Batman.
So Batman, yeah, exactly. So he lived
Je
in
suis Batman.
Volant, tabarnak. So he spent a lot of his early childhood in the family manor, which was located outside of Montreal in a small locality called Sainte Catherine de Fossambeau, right?
Mhm.
Which is the most Quebecois thing I've ever said. Um, and from 1923 onward, he basically lived in Montreal's, upper middle class district of Westmount. So, yay.
How very Anglophone of him.
Yeah, absolutely. Very much a francophone family.
Mm.
But yeah, they were just they had succeed.
Masquerading,
Yeah, they
passing
had
as
succeed.
Anglo.
I guess they had succeeded enough in early 20th century Quebec that they were able to integrate into the Westmount.
Hey, are you saying that a Francophone has to live in Westmount to 16? Hey,
Yes,
fuck you, buddy.
says the guy who's quite successful and doesn't live in Westmount.
Yeah.
Um, he actually did start going to college and get somewhat of an education. But two things very much put a break on that, which was first, of course, the depression, right? Which
Right.
that'll do it. Um, and actually, he fell very ill. Um,
Gee, I
he
wonder why.
most probably because of the
The
depression.
depression.
So the capital D Great Depression, right?
With his
Was
little d depression.
But his little D depression actually did arrive because his illness left him with a cardiac lesion, and what it made was that he could have what it resulted in was that he could have less and less of an active and public life, and he would become more and more kind of closed in on himself. Right?
Jesus Christ, was this man written by Charles Dickens? Like,
Yes, pretty much. You could probably write a Dickensian novel about this guy, and it would rock.
oh my God.
So He did actually, like you mentioned, start a small journal before he went totally, um, totally isolated. This is a journal called La Relève, literally the new generation, I guess would be one way of translating that.
I think we've talked about that one before
It's very
almost.
possible. It's very possible that it's come
Is it
up.
still around?
If it is, I doubt it's in the same like it's like continuous,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it might be.
sorry.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, like some very well-known names were actually associated with that journal, like André Laurendeau, who's a very well-known name in Quebec history. Um, for those of you who do you know who André Laurendeau is actually before I start explaining it?
No,
Okay.
but I just looked it up, and there was also another magazine called La Relève,
Hmm.
created by Paul Beaulieu, Robert Charbonneau, Jean Lemoyne, and Claude Hibetibes.
That's
So I feel
exactly
like it
it.
was a popular name. Oh,
No,
it's the
that's
same
that's
one?
the same one. Yeah, yeah,
Then where did Garneau get into here? Well, I guess he was just a contributor then.
yeah. Yeah.
A
So
loser.
yeah, Robert Haley, Paul Beaulieu, and Jean Lemoyne, right, all helped found this journal, right? André Laurendeau uh, is a well-known Quebec politician, or was, right? Very much of a nationalistic type of bend, and helped to kind of bring Quebec towards its more uh, national path that it took, right, in
Hmm.
the 60s and 70s. Um, so where was I in my notes? Yeah. So, like I said, this little section on his personal life is going to be very short because in 1937, so we're not even out of the Great Depression yet. Hector de Saint-Denys-Garneau went basically a huge spiritual crisis, as I'm sure a lot of people did during the Great Depression. It basically felt left him filled with self-doubt and
Hmm.
loneliness, and all of this compounded by his illness just absolutely crushed him. Right? He didn't know what he wanted to do anymore. He didn't know if it was even worth doing. He basically doom scrolled version 1937 to the point where he just withdrew from contact with basically everyone, and in 1941 moved back to his manor, his family's manor,
And
and
then
he died
adopted a
there.
young ward who would inherit his fortune and go on to try and bring his work and get it published in the modern day.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sorry that like this dude is a character,
Yeah, yeah.
which probably explains why he wrote so much poetry. You can't be a normal person and write ground-changing, earth-shattering work.
No, no. There's a pet theory of mine that like for a really good poet, you have to be kind of depressed.
I don't think you have to be depressed, but you have to have like something has to be going on in your life, you know?
Yeah, you can't be normal. Yeah,
No, especially
no.
for poetry. You can get away with like novel writing and fiction
Hmm.
writing, but like
Poetry, no. You have to absolutely. There has to be at least one screw that's kind of not loose. That's kind
yeah.
of loose. Yeah, yeah.
That's why I can't be a poet. I'm too normal.
Says the guy who's just punning all the time.
Yeah. Well, that's not poetry. That's just being an asshole.
But yeah, like he was 31 by the time he died in 1943, like
Mm.
super young. And yeah, he had spent the last 2 years of his life just not going out of the manor at all. He just died there. Yeah. Um, so that's the personal life, right? So we can just basically move on to the poetry. Um, which as I mentioned before, he is kind of considered to be a founder of like the more modern and liberated poetry in Quebec,
Right.
right? And when I say liberated, it's like willing to actually take risks about what they talk about and how they actually write the poems formalistically, stylistically, and even thematically.
Hmm.
Um, and despite that, he only actually published one book of poems in his lifetime. He wrote a lot more than that, but there's only one that came out. And that was uh, a collection that's called Regards et Jeux dans l'espace, which
Okay.
literally translates to um, looking and playing into space, right? Or staring and playing in space,
Hmm.
which I think is a really cool title, very symbolic. Um, and obviously, this plays up what's happening in the actual poetry of the work, right? which was the promise of conquering, metaphorical space in this case, not
Mm.
actual outer space, but like metaphorical space, thanks to poetic vision. So you can maybe see why I mentioned that he's a very Wordsworth and Dickinson type figure. This guy. Everything is poetry.
Until it's not. If
Yeah.
everything is poetry, then nothing is.
But you're right. So this was actually the publication of this was actually one of the reasons why he slowly started to be depressed, right? Or at least more overtly depressed,
Hmm.
because it was published in 1937 and basically greeted by general indifference by the literary community and reading public. Um, Part of that might have been because of the Great Depression, right? People didn't necessarily have the
Time or
time,
money.
money, inclination to read poetry, right?
But it's also, I think it's money is part of it, but I also think it's just people, you become so focused on yourself. You don't have a mindset to read poetry,
Mhm.
like you just want, because it's not about you. And right now, the only thing you want to think about is you and your immediate problems.
Exactly. Exactly.
That, or you want a total distraction, which is,
Yeah.
things like comedy and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Absolutely. You don't want a highly meditative and metaphysical
No.
type of poetry that questions the boundary between childhood innocence and the experience of a guy who's just slowly going mad. Who knew? Um,
That's just high school, dude.
well, that's the thing, right? When he would have written a lot of these poems, he wouldn't have been like that old again, right? Like he
That's true.
died when he was 31. This would have been published in 1937, so 6 years prior. Yeah, so he would have,
25.
yeah, he would have been 25, 24 when it was published. He would have written them a lot earlier. So high school drama wouldn't have been that far off of his mind, actually.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Which is like, again, that is a very fair thing to write about when you're a teenager. I
Hmm.
work with teenagers. I can tell you, they have no clue what they're doing. They have no idea. Because,
You
no, but
say
it's
that
true.
as
Because,
if I have any clue what I'm doing.
but no, but it's more the idea like,
Mhm.
if something happens, we know how to figure things out. When
Yes.
you are a teenager, you basically have to go from having everything picked out and planned for you
Hmm.
to deciding everything for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. And that's not, I don't want to say this to like diminish the work that he's doing in these books, in this book of poetry. Like I do genuinely think it's a brilliant work of art, right?
Hmm.
But to kind of go off of what you're saying, I do think it's reasonable to think that he would have been inspired by these thoughts that you would have had not that long ago as a teenager, and you just kind of ran with them, right?
Yeah.
In a really brilliant way, but still going off of those same themes and ideas,
Well,
right?
in only a short span of like, let's say 5 years, 12 to 17, you learn about, you learn and have to make moral decisions about drinking, smoking, sexuality, politics. You have to start getting like all of these major things you have to start thinking about when a couple years beforehand, your biggest thought was, what am I going to watch Saturday morning cartoons and what cereal am I going to eat?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, for sure. And like now bring that back a century, right? And you have to do that, and everything is going to shit, right? And you have a heart lesion.
I mean, everything's still going to shit these
Yeah,
days.
sure. No, of course, but I'm trying to put it in like his context, of course.
Yeah.
But you do see it, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
even to make the joke of like today, right? Like you do see it. The teenagers being more depressed than ever, in part because of everything is going to shit.
Yeah.
Like,
It's
yeah.
yeah, it's paralyzing. It's
Mhm.
paralyzing for them. Like
Yep.
I literally have students who will be there and go, "Sir, I don't like I'm gonna miss this place, not because I like it, but because I don't know what I'm gonna do."
Hmm. Yep. Oh yeah, I've had students come up to me often with that. Yeah, for sure. Um, Hold on to that thought of like, what am I going to do? I think it might be
Oh
useful for
yay.
some of the poems. Um, so yeah, he never published anything else after that, mostly because of the reception that left him kind of paralyzed. Although later poems and other poems were published posthumously. The collection that I'm working with and that you have access to is like the collected works, for example.
Hmm.
But like his journals have been published, letters have been published, Um, and so his influence and interest has gone on, mostly since the 1950s. That's kind of when a lot of these posthumous publications emerged, right? But still, right, as a general rule, he did have a noted interest, like I said, even on English Canadian poets. So one of the people who was a forerunner of modernism in English Canada, F.R. Scott, who we've talked about before,
Hmm.
he actually translated a lot of Saint-Denis-Garneau poems. And so he would have definitely engaged with the works more in depth. It's not his translations that we're actually working with today. We're working with the John Glasgow translations, but still, right? It's just to show that
Yeah.
um, people actually did actively participate in the creation and thoughtfulness of these poems. Um, and yeah, you can kind of see, I just want to mention here, like the journals are really interesting because they do discuss many facets of his life, right? And art and literature. So if people want to know more about what his intentions were, you do get a lot of that in his
Hmm.
personal journals, right? How like he goes from being really interested in the potential of poetry to turning slowly into like painful self-analysis. And just like this psychoanalytic self-psychoanalysis that's quite disturbing at times or like disconcerting. Um, and yeah, like um, I think part of that also comes from the fact that he was very politically aware, right? And a lot of his intellectual friends also were and corresponded excessively with him, right? But
Hmm.
these letters, as you can see, right, the last letters that are compiled end in 1938, and they end in like complete despair as well, right? He's just completely unhooked from the potentials of reality, right? He's just kind of lost
Yeah.
all faith, I should say. Um, which again, by the end of the Depression, a lot of people had as well. He just didn't commit suicide, right? Like a lot of people necessarily
Yeah.
did. But
No,
yeah,
instead he
it's
wasted away,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
which, if you give it's a much slower version of suicide.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah. Um, okay, now actually talking about his poems, though. I
Hmm.
took a few, right? And you can, I think, most interestingly think of his poems as very influenced by paintings, right? He was a painter himself a little bit, but also
Of
like,
course he was. What a
yeah,
pretentious asshole.
yeah, because why not be a painter as well? Like pure bougie. He mostly painted bats in caves and robins for some reason. I don't know why.
You had me there. You had me going there for a second.
Oh God. Um, so yeah, like the this very imagistic, right? Or impressionistic, I guess you could say, um,
Mhm.
sensibility does play into a lot of his poems. But one of the major concerns, if you want to really get at the heart of his poetic vision, is to try to access what is inaccessible to a materialist view of the world,
Mhm.
right? Um, right. So trying to search for poetry in a transforming vision of poetry, right? And very much influenced by philosophy and religious thinking, very much influenced by Plato, apparently. So that's cool. If you want, I guess the allegory of the cave had a huge influence on him. He was like, I must enter the cave.
I see the shadows. I must
Yeah,
go back to
exactly.
them.
Yeah, yeah, but like the actual like you can
Reverse
think of it
Plato.
no, but you can think of it in that sense, right? Like actually getting at the heart of the shadows was something that he was interested in, and thinking
Mhm.
that the poems could help him get at the meaning behind those shadows is something that you can probably think about in an interesting way. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
Um, okay. So do you actually have the poems in front of you?
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean, I
cool.
can get to them through the book.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Do you want to read the first one actually, just so I can stop
Spectacle
talking?
de la danse.
Yeah, this one's on page 24. The English translation is Picture of the Dance.
I'll read part of it. Because
Yeah, sure.
oh, it's
It's a
two
page and a
pages.
half. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And here we go. My children, you are dancing badly. True, it is hard to dance here in this airless place, here without space, which is the heart of the dance. Not knowing how to play with space, you cannot play within it. Without chains, poor children who cannot play. How can you hope to dance? I have seen the walls, the city cutting off your glance before it began, cropping your maimed vision at the shoulders, even before one rhythmic movement, before its race and final rest, it's flowering far beyond the city landscape before your glance could flower in the marriage with the sky, that wedding of the gaze and sky, of infinites brought face to face, a clash of wonders. The dance is the second measure, and the second flight, it takes possession of the world after the primal victory of the gaze. That gaze which leaves indeed no mark on space, less than the bird itself and its wake, than even the song in its invisible flight, an impalpable shifting of the air itself an insubstantial embrace, closest of all to the changeless, which is the transparent, like a reflection of the landscape in water, the landscape we never see that falls into the river. So the dance is a paraphrase of the vision, the road covered that was lost by the searching eyes, a statelier measure slowing to recapture the all-embracing magic of its beginning.
Very good. Very good.
This is the kind of poetry if you showed it to a student, they want to kill you.
Yes. And that's why I love it. That's why I think it is a
Of course
banger.
you do. Of
Do you
course you do.
not?
I mean, you're talking to the guy who doesn't like poetry very much to begin
No, I
with.
know. But can you see like
Yeah, I can see the brilliance of it, don't get me
yeah.
wrong.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
It just doesn't like do anything for me, you know? It's like those big fancy movies that win at the Oscars all the time now.
That's fair. It's but yeah, I don't know. Because
No, like I like the like well, I don't like, but I can see what it's doing with the language and I can see how it's playing with the imagery and the movement and all that.
yeah.
And again, the dancing sort of again recaptures that idea of returning to the cave and you have no room to dance. You are without because even if you don't have change, you don't have the space and blah blah blah. Like
Yeah. But it's more than just returning to the cave, right? It's returning to childhood here.
yeah.
That's failing, right? Every attempt to recapture any like the brilliance of childhood, right? The sense of wonder that we had as children is blocked at every turn in this poem, right?
Well,
Uh,
and it's
Go ahead.
interesting because even that first couple of lines,
Mhm.
it is hard to dance here in this airless place, here without space, which is the heart of the dance. That in itself is very much invoking to me, almost like in the rest of the poem invokes like the womb.
Yeah, yeah. Or even where is it? I have seen the walls, the city
Yeah.
cutting off your glance before it began. That's yeah, I think that's a really good one. Um, Yeah, for sure. And it's like I like also that part of the alienation or inability to recapture that sense of childlike wonder that you get from dance or artistic
Mm,
expression are all, or a lot of them seem to be images of modernity,
hmm
right? These things that you don't see naturally occurring in nature. It's a very romantic poem in that sense, but it's also
Meanwhile, I'd say
very
the most natural thing to occur in nature is birth. There's nothing more
well,
natural.
but yeah, exactly. But like, and yet he talks about walls, right?
Hmm
And yet he talks about the city and maimed visions, right? So all of this clash of wonders, um, these things that are poetically quite
Yeah.
beautiful, and yet at the same time are the things that are stopping him from actually accomplishing what we all want, right?
Mm.
Which is wanting to embrace the world as a child does,
I
with like
want to
wonder.
break free.
Oh yeah, exactly. Right? Like you were saying, we all just want to kind of go back to a moment when all we had to decide was what do I eat for lunch or whatever,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah,
it's
no, that's
it's
true.
great.
There's simplicity.
Or like experiencing a tree for the first time, right? Experiencing
Do you
a
remember the first time you experienced a tree?
no, and that's the point. I wish I could, right? It sucks that
Yeah.
it's too normal, right?
The first
Anyway,
time you saw blue,
yeah.
dabba dee dabba da.
No,
But then you
okay.
saw green and you thought you would die. Dabba
I
dee dabba
hate
da.
you.
Sorry. I'm sorry. But it is true. Like there is
Yeah,
very
yeah,
much
yeah,
something you can't go back to that, you know? In a
yeah.
similar sentiment, you can't ever go back to anything because the genie is always coming out of the bottle. The
Yeah.
toothpaste is always coming out of the cap.
Yeah. No, for sure. And it's not, of course, just about art and childhood wonder, but like the actual conditions that are necessary for this kind of freedom, right? Like that's also what he's getting at, right? Um, and that's why when I say that he's someone who's very much concerned with vision, having that vision that you can actually engage with is integral to the actual act of engaging with the world for Garneau. So anyway, this was my essay on why Garneau is just basically Wordsworth.
But for kids,
Yeah, I guess.
Wordsworth about kids.
I mean, Wordsworth wrote a lot about children,
That's true.
right? And his childlike wonder. He wrote a whole book about it.
Yeah, that's the other thing though. Like
Mhm.
these guys, I think part of the problem is a lot of these guys they don't want to go back to being children. They want to
No.
go back to when they were ignorant and didn't know so much.
Yeah.
That seems to be the real, but like because we were talking about when you like knowledge of a tree,
Mhm.
knowledge of the color blue. That's what they're almost coming off as if they're cursed by knowledge.
Cursed by knowledge, and like one of the things that I think a lot of modern people get at in their analysis is like once you know something, you can't appreciate it as much again and
No,
again, right?
yeah, they
Like so
they
there
they
is a
want
level
to
of
pull. They don't want like the curtain was pulled back, and it's almost like they want to put the
Mhm.
curtain back in place.
Yeah.
They don't want to
Yeah.
see the man behind the wizard.
Yeah. It's the curse of reason, if you want to think of it that
Yeah,
way, right? Like once you can actually reason your way out of everything, you kind of lose
yeah.
the flavor of just not knowing,
Well, because
right?
there is a lot of people that keep that
Mhm.
in place, and it's just they grow up and they change it for other things, instead of
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah.
In a sense, reason becomes, and like I'm not saying this as in people who do this are dumb, but it is a different sense of like faith, for example.
Yeah. Yeah.
These men of reason will be the first ones to say that they do not believe in God a lot of the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Or in the more modern day, we have any sort of that media consumption,
Hmm.
politics.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Um, I know that you're short on time for today's episode.
We could
So,
probably do one more.
okay. Do you want to do the longer one or the shorter one?
If we're only doing one more, let's do the longer one.
You want to do the longer one? Okay. So, actually, yeah, we can do kind of both. But so the next section is esquisse en plein air, which I didn't look up what the English translation does have the same title in French, right? So it's not I'm not actually
Oh yeah, we can
um,
do this real quick
okay,
because it's
but
just a
no,
blank page first of all, and then you go down and it's one stanza.
no. So it's a whole section of poems. That's the thing. Like
Oh,
all the poems that you see until like number four or number five, whichever one is comes after. Yeah, until number four are all part of that same
the
poetic.
voice of the leaves, a song, more clearly a rustling of brighter dresses of the sheerest colors. So again, using that sort of fall imagery, or I guess that's what came to me is fall because that's what I think of when I really think of leaves. I think of the fall and the leaves changing colors.
Yeah, yeah,
And the dresses of the sheerest colors, like that's when the leaves really. And again, fall is a time of death, the
yeah.
thing that is in the past. And so it is, but the past is brighter. And he's basically saying, be careful of nostalgia,
Yeah,
which,
absolutely.
big revelation. Good job.
No, but I think you can see like why that would be important, especially in the 1930s, right? When he's writing this. Yeah.
Why it's still important today.
Yes, 100%. Yeah. And it's worth noting also that this section, right, esquisse en plein air. Do you know what an esquisse is? Like what that
No.
means in French? It means a sketch, right?
Oh,
So
so a
the
sketch in open air.
yeah, that would be the literal translation. Would be sketch in
Okay.
open air. Yeah, yeah, an open air sketch. Yeah. Um, and so it does immediately evoke this idea of like a painting that I was bringing up
Mm.
before, right? Or at least setting up the basis for a painting, which also ties into the first poem or first full poem of that section, which is called Watercolor. Nothing to render you so clearly fields, and you translucent trees, you leaves, and for your lights to catch the least of these, then the watercolor water clear, clear gauze, this pale veil on the paper. Um, and I really, shocker, I also really like this poem. Right? I was like, that seems to be a consistent trend in these ones.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting one to contrast to the first one that you read, right?
Hmm.
Uh, the the picture of the dance one. You know, much more concise poem, much more programmatic, almost. Like I don't know if programmatic is the right adjective. Do you get what I mean if I say that? Right?
Say it again.
Programmatic. Right.
Programmatic. Well,
Yeah. How could I explain? This it's not the right term that I'm using here. Um, where it seems much more mechanical, I guess would be another way of putting
oh,
it, right? Like the words are not superfluous and flowery and all of that like they
hmm.
are in Picture of the Dance, right? It's almost like a machine pumping out words, and yet it still manages to get some
Right.
artistic fragility and subtlety across, right?
Hmm.
There's like this metaphor, I guess, for the delicate interface between perception and representation, right? Where he sees these translucent trees and leaves and, the light catching through them. And then it contrasts with actually putting it in watercolor onto a veil of paper, right?
Hmm.
Um, a veil that, of course, does nothing but hide from the reality of the world around you, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and like we're not necessarily going to read all the poems in this sequence just because there are like seven. Um, but they're all um, concerned with like nature in some way, right? And how it's filtered through a very attentive consciousness, right?
Hmm.
And it's a very delicate sequence of poems in its linguistic usages. He doesn't really want to impose a meaning here, but he purely invites just perception of these worlds, right? Um, and that becomes especially true with starting with the third poem in that sequence, where it
Hmm.
becomes all about trees. See, there's a reason why I brought up trees in the first place because he does actually talk about them.
Hey, he's a Quebecer. He
That's this,
can't get to he can't get to four without a tree in the way.
yeah, no, for sure. Um,
Did you
but
just
like,
agree to
yeah, of course I did.
my stupid joke?
Yes, for once I agree with your stupid, right? But like, there's a poem on willows and then on elms, and
Mm-hmm.
then willows again, right? So he kind of sandwiches elms between two willow poems.
Hmm.
Um, and then he finishes off with Pines Against the Light.
Ooh.
Um, so I guess I'll just read Pines Against the Light, which is just the last one in that sequence.
Yeah.
Um,
This will be our last one.
okay. Has it already been an hour and a half?
No, but it's been about an hour.
Oh, okay.
I gotta get changed and all that sort
Yeah,
of
yeah,
stuff.
yeah. Okay. So Pines Against the Light. In the light, their leaf work is like water, islands of clear water. On the black of the spruce, shadowed against the light, they are all flowing, each feathery plume, and the spray, an island of bright water at the branch's tip. Each needle a thread of living water. Each plume a little gushing spring, running away, who knows where. They are flowing as I have seen in spring, the willows flowing, the whole tree nothing but silver, all luster, all wave, all watery foaming flight, like the wind made visible and seeming, a liquid thing in a magic window.
Hmm.
Thank you. Thank you. Any thoughts on this one before we wrap it up?
Well, again, just much more, definitely see a lot more imagery on that one. So a
Hmm.
lot more use of that imagery,
Yeah.
which I think does sort of help differentiate. Trees is always an interesting just because of where you like position it or how
Yeah.
you sort of use the tree in your metaphor.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because I don't know, because trees have a very like they all have very a lot of symbolism to them.
Yes.
Different trees have very strong symbol, which is more complicated than dance.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And like, okay, like I made a joke about Wordsworth. literally, right? That was a thing. Have you ever read the Intimations Ode?
No.
Like, oh man, you should. It's great. Probably like the poem that has influenced the most poetry going forward. Um,
Mm.
but like, there's a moment, I don't remember how many stanzas, but he wrote the first four and then he stopped for a bit. And then he picked it back up again. But the last
Mhm.
stanza in that initial jet ends with him coming across a tree or the speaker coming across a tree and just not being able to actually engage with it properly, right? Like it
Mhm.
just overwhelms him. Basically, is what happens in that moment in the poem. He's struck by it, by its raw power, and I think Galno is getting at something very similar here. Saint-Denis Galno is getting at something very similar here, where I think you're correct in saying that a tree is a complicated image. And he gets at that at the end of this sequence of poems, which are all about different aspects of the nature around him. And he
Mhm.
brings all of these natural elements together in the tree. It's a liquid thing in a magic window, right? The wind is made visible through it. So he brings wind, water, mirrors, and magic into this one like tree and turns it into this, you know, fluid, light-based, watery being, right? And
Right.
it's it really unites these ideas that he gets at in a lot of his poems, which is, the visible and invisible, the concrete and the ephemeral, right? And specifically here through the transforming power of light. Um, we can
Which
probably talk a lot. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I just think that trans light is an interesting one always to come back to, especially for somebody who probably locked himself away in a dark mansion for so long.
Yeah. And a religious person,
Yeah.
right?
God.
Or perhaps like a lapsed religious person, right? Struggling with his faith. So the power of light is very much
Hmm.
something that he would have been concerned with. Yeah, for sure. How to recapture that power? You can't,
Yeah.
or at
No.
least he couldn't, right? Yeah, awesome. So I know we have to get out. So this was a bit of a shorter poem,
Mhm.
shorter episode here. But do you have any like final thoughts? Was this a worthwhile poet to look
Oh,
at?
they're always worthwhile to look at. I just, I'm probably never going to think about them again. Which it sounds like that's what he wanted, somebody who was that depressed.
I guess. Yeah. Um, so I guess like just as final thoughts on it, like the social, economic, and like cultural dispossession that was experienced by young Quebecois intellectuals in the 1930s, right? Um, Again, very much fueled his alienation here. Um, I know I've read in like some other places that a lot of his educators also had very moralizing attitudes towards a lot of these things, including sex, and a lot of commentators on Saint Denis Garneau's work uh, hooked onto that, right?
Hmm.
As like a representation of his repressed sexualities and the repressed morals of the Quebec of the 1930s, right? Um, and yeah, or you can even, some people have even read that these poems are a result of the pressures of capitalistic English Canada upon Quebecois nationhood, right?
Hmm.
Or Oedipus complexes, right? There's a lot more that we can unpack here, and we're not doing so for the sake of time, but you know, I think one of the marks of a great poet and one that has had influence is the fact that people can keep coming back to him through these various angles and they still find new meaning in him and his
Hmm.
work. And in the 60s, he would basically become viewed as like a vanquished hero of, violence in Quebec, right? Metaphorical and actual violence that was exerted upon the Quebec people, right?
Hmm.
And so that kind of became part of the rhetoric surrounding him. But then in the 80s and 90s, there was the more formal aspect of his legacy that was gradually seen as meeting not only like prosodic liberation, right? But also a very self-referential conception of poetry. There's a lot that people hooked onto with these works. So if people are interested, listeners are interested in reading more, I would very much recommend it. And don't let the simple language of the
Yeah.
poems deceive you, is what I would say here. It's
Oh, for sure.
it's again like Dickinson and Blake, right? Using very simple language, but the more you think about it, the more it actually reveals much deeper meanings to you. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know.
Awesome.
Yeah. That's it. We're out of here.
I mean, that's I think that if we had more time, we would have gone through more poetry.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's this is really a good episode to highlight the way things have actually just stayed very similar. The
Yep.
themes and ideas are still very similar to this man, despite his seemingly Dickensian appearance.
Yeah. Again, I'm sure there's actually like a fiction novel to be written there somewhere, for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, okay, so just because I know you need to get out, so thank you everyone for listening, and don't forget to support us on the Patreon. We're going to release a new episode of Pop Canada there soon, and we already have some early episodes that and early interviews that I've recorded, so you can kind of check them out there. But otherwise, keep sharing the show. We've continued to grow our listener base, and we will catch you next time on A Cultural History of Canada. Cheers, everyone.
Woo! Cheers.